So I just want to start by thanking everyone for attending the 2020 UMD Environmental Justice Symposium. My name is Rami Homsi. I'm an intern in Dr. Shakobi Wilson's Environmental Justice and Health Lab, and I'll be moderating today's panel on concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. So joining us today are Maria Payan, a consultant from the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, or SRAP, Greg Gunthorp, owner of Gunthorp Farms, a mid-scale heritage hog farm from northeastern Indiana, Lily Hawkins, an organizer from Maryland with Food and Water Action, and hopefully Devon Hall Sr. will be joining us today. He's the co-founder and current program manager of REACH. So I'm going to allow you all to introduce yourselves. So if you could all just please tell us about your organizations and your work with CAFOs. So Greg, let's start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greg Gunthorp, Gunthorp Farms. We have a family farm in LaGrange, Indiana. We raise pastured pigs, chickens, ducks, and turkeys. And we have a USDA inspected processing plant on the farm. I've been quite active in the concentration consolidation issues around confinement livestock production and the loss of the independent traditional family farm for 20-some years now. Served on the USDA Small Farm Commission back when Clinton was president and Glickman was Secretary of Ag. Worked a lot with Organization for Competitive Markets over the years. I'm on the advocacy committee for the American Grass-Fed Association. Do some stuff with slow foods. Was served on the Humane Society's Rural Ag Advisory Committee for a couple of years. So been very involved in this space. And like I said, my main area that I focus on is on the concentration and consolidation around these issues.
Thank you. Lily, how about you?
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, everyone. My name is Lily Hawkins. I'm an organizer in Maryland with Food and Water Action. We also do work at the national level. And our mission is, we say we're fighting for our essential resources, safe food, clean water, and a livable climate. And I think that our work on CAFOs really pulls all of those things together, since we know that industrial animal agriculture and industrial meat processing contribute to climate change, as well as polluting the water, and really aren't good for food safety. So we've worked over the years here in Maryland, sort of pushing back against the poultry industry in a variety of ways. Most recently, we worked to support the Community Healthy Air Act, which I believe we're going to talk a little bit more about later in the program, and moratorium on new and expanding factory farms in Maryland. Currently, we're really pushing to support the Farm System Reform Act, which has been introduced at the federal level. And this is legislation that, among other things, would help to phase out the factory farms, the large factory farms, and provide for a just transition for folks in that industry. And I can put more, if anyone's interested in that, I'll just put a link to an article in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Maria?
So my name is Maria Payan. I am a regional consultant with Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, which is actually a national organization. I work in a lot of the Chesapeake Bay watershed states, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. I have a Virginia. So we are, as I said, a national organization, and what we do is we work with local communities. I like to call us the boots on the ground in the communities. We're kind of unique in that while a lot of groups work on policy, we are actually the ones that communities reach out to when there is either a permit of a big operation coming in, of a CAFO, which is also referred to, as you said, concentrated animal feeding operation, or AKA factory farms, as some people know. And we educate about the negative impacts to public health, to the natural resources, and to the communities, and the actual economics of the family farms that are impacted through the introduction of this very vertically integrated system. So our vision is to see a system which is more equitable, socially responsible, environmentally sound, and economically viable for family farms.
Great, thank you so much. So what are some concerns of the, what are some of the environmental health concerns you all have seen regarding CAFOs? Who do you see being the most impacted by these industries, and what bearing does this all have on environmental justice? Lily, can you please start us off?
Sure. So as I said, Food and Water Watch, or Food and Water Action, does in Maryland is really focused on the poultry industry on the Eastern Shore. I don't know how many people here have been near these big chicken houses, but they, you know, it's a huge, huge building with a giant fan on the end, and those fans just blow out a ton of particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, ammonia, and other nasty stuff. And we really do see an increase in some adverse health outcomes in communities where you have a high concentration of these chicken houses. A lot of respiratory problems, higher than average rates of asthma, certain types of cancer. And if you're near them, you can immediately feel the effects where, like, it's in your eyes and your nose, and you can see how long-term exposure it's intuitive that it would cause trouble, and we do see that borne out by statistics. It also can contaminate the groundwater and folks' wells. And what we see that in Maryland, the counties that have the highest concentration of these chicken houses are also some of our poorest counties with the lowest income rates, and also pretty high percentage of the community is minorities. So it's no accident that they're being cited where they are. You know, they're not putting them in Montgomery County, Maryland, where it's the DC suburbs or something. And, you know, we have an agricultural reserve in that county, but we're not seeing chicken houses there. And you know, I think there's a reason for that, because no one wants these near them, and if you have the resources to push back, you would.
Thank you. Maria?
So yes, as Lily said, there are a lot of environmental exposures and impacts. I will bring in a few personal stories, one from my family and one from a community that I was working in that was really severe, because I think it helps people to understand what actually goes on when you live near these facilities. So we had bought a property next to a family farm, and what had happened, the family had sold it, and it quickly became an industrialized facility. Poultry house after poultry house after poultry house after poultry house went up. Industrial feedlot with the underground liquid manure storage. They had problems there with mass mortality. But we immediately saw not only the change to the health of our family, but also to just the environmental systems. Things that used to be very prevalent species were disappearing. I can remember my son would always go into a creek behind the house and go out there catching frogs, and he had come in and he had a frog that literally had eyes down the back of the frog. And that was kind of like a big, something's really wrong now. We had been dealing with issues. I was taking my son to the doctor for tightness of the chest at 8 years old. My son's an athlete. This isn't something that was prevalent or in any way, shape, or form happening before we were living with a new neighbor that was not a good neighbor. He would, when they would agitate the underground, the manure in the liquid feedlot, the stench was so bad. Literally, he would get off the school bus, he would throw up when he breathed in the air. And that was another bells ringing in my head. You know, I think about someone who drinks too much, it's a toxin going in their body, and I thought, this is not good. I would have to call them in, playing him and his friends with football at certain times, because you could tell this was not healthy for children to be breathing in this. I actually had to call 911 at night because we were all dizzy inside our homes. Inside. It comes in the vents, it comes in the cracks. And after the mass mortality, when my son was bathing, he was coming out of the bathtub with palm-sized blisters all over his entire body, and I was rushing him to emergency care. So these are, you know, severe, severe impacts. And it wasn't just him, it was the entire family with respiratory rashes, you name it, and it was happening. Something was dramatically wrong. The most severe community, I was called in a few years ago by a community in Sussex County, Delaware, and it was an environmental injustice community. The folks there had spray fields from a processing plant that literally had left patterns of the spray on the paint of a car. And going from house to house, talking to folks, there were alarm bells ringing off. Next door neighbors were having miscarriages. There was a high number of birth defects, which was beyond the risk assessment. We had animals that were having seizures. Again, we were seeing these mutations in mice and various, so tumors all over. It was like going from a hospital, from one house to the other. It was, I've never seen any. And it ended up that there were massive problems there. The permits were way over. And this had been going on for a while. They had contaminated wells. So the impacts are very severe. And like Lily said, we tend to see this in areas where they're already overburdened with pollution. There is a lot of minority and low income population, and they don't have a political voice to fight back. So I think that's the answer to the community side of the question.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Greg?
Yeah, I think that the ones that are impacted the most are those that live closest to these very large confinement facilities. And I highly recommend that people watch a documentary called Right to Harm. Both Maria and I were included in the documentary, but it showcases some egregious situations across the country, some large CAFOs in southern Wisconsin where neighbors end up with groundwater that is brown. People out in Arizona too close to 4 million laying hens, which is about 1 out of every 80 hens in the United States on one farm, where, you know, the ammonia levels, the hydrogen sulfide levels are too high for people that live in the area. But I also think that it goes beyond the people that are living close to these facilities. And, you know, you look at the Gulf and the level of nitrates in the water in the Gulf, the dead zone is getting bigger and bigger all the time. So, you know, we're impacting not only the environment, but people that are, you know, have fished for generations down there and made their living harvesting seafood from the Gulf, have been destroyed by activities, you know, in the Midwest and improper applications of manure and over applications and all that. But I also think that there's some other broader categories. You know, we've got resistant bacteria that are resistant to just hosts of antibiotics coming from the putting animals in overcrowded, very, very close conditions. We're creating ideal breeding grounds. You know, they've been fed low levels of antibiotics for decades to allow them to continue these practices of housing animals in unnatural conditions. It's created some staffs that are serious problems. It's created some other ones, some salmonellas, some you name it, has the potential to create some serious pandemics. We really ought to consider that. But you know, the biggest thing that I see personally, what it's done is it's harmed the whole health and the fabric of our rural communities. You know, rural America used to be a place where true entrepreneurial spirit thrived. People could make a living by raising animals, owning animals. Virtually none of these animals are even owned by the farmer anymore. I always tell people, somewhat jokingly, but it's true, that people that have the animals on their farm own the manure, the mortalities, and the mortgage on the building. They don't own anything else. They don't make any of those direct decisions on how those animals are raised. Pigs in my lifetime went from being the mortgage lifter to now they're the mortgage. You know, used to be when I was young, people could make a living farming with some milk cows or with some sows, could buy a farm, feed a family, have a decent life. That's not an opportunity anymore. 90% of the hog farmers from my time till I was my son's age, so in one generation, 90% of the hog farmers have disappeared. We're doing the same thing to milk now. Chickens was the same way. Eggs were the first thing to go. Chickens, fat cattle, so the people finishing beef cattle, then hogs, now dairy. There's really not an independent agriculture left in the United States, and our rural communities look like it. If you look at the economic metrics, they're worse than the inner cities. And that's because of concentration and consolidation in agriculture and the destruction of the health and vibrancy of our rural communities.
Right. Thank you. So you all have talked about the impacts of these industrial operations on local residents, but are there any impacts on workers? Is there a lot known about the impacts of processing plants on the workers? What impact is COVID-19 having on agricultural workers and processing plant workers in your state? Maria, let's start with you.
So we have, when COVID-19 first hit, firstly, let me start out by saying, before COVID-19 ever hit, these are one of the most dangerous jobs in America. And the turnover rate is very high. It's very hard work. And it was not a job that a lot of gratitude came out. A lot of the folks are migrants, are undocumented. A lot of the folks are minority. And this we've seen Latinos, African American. What we saw in Sussex County, Delaware, where I live, which is right on the borderline of Maryland, although we saw this in Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia, the entire Delmarva, chain where Poultry is located, was in my county alone, we have 6 processing plants, 6 in one county. And we were starting to see hotspots where we had ratios that were extremely high. And there was not testing being done in these plants. Matter of fact, the one plant that's closest to me, they were trying to union bust in the middle of COVID, which is, to me, just beyond appalling. at the time when you really need representation. During this crisis was not the time, but we saw what happened. You know, the executive orders went in, they were essential workers. The line space, people are shoulder to shoulder. Proper protective gear was not being given out when it was being given out. Some of the workers were being charged for it. If workers missed work, I know the one facility, if you missed a week, you were given 60% of your pay. These are families within our community. These are part of our community. And they have children at home. They have mothers and fathers and grandparents at home. I knew personally someone who had a newborn baby, and they were offering a hotel where people could go and stay so they would not be near the family as essential workers. And this gentleman did because he was terrified with a brand new baby of bringing this home to his family. They even sped up line speeds, if people can believe this, in the middle of this. So we have a lot of work to do on the injustice to the workers. I think a lot of our agencies, which are supposed to be in charge to protect, have been influenced politically, and it's not happening. And this is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against people. You know, essential does not mean disposable. So there are horror stories throughout where people were just disappearing off the line and nobody was told what was happening to them. We've had massive amounts throughout the country. This is not unique to the Eastern Shore. And I think if we don't learn from this, we've wasted a terrible opportunity to fix some wrongs.
Absolutely. Thank you. Greg, can you answer the question, please?
Sure. You know, it's obvious, and I think it was obvious to lots of us before the coronavirus, but I think it's obvious to a much larger portion of the population now that we have some serious injustices in our food supply, and especially at the processing level. You know, I believe that at one point the fourth largest hotspot in the country was one packing plant in South Dakota. You know, we've allowed the meat packing and processing industry to become so consolidated that about 27 beef slaughter plants slaughter 85% of the beef in 13 states, and about 40 pork slaughter plants slaughter about 90% of the hogs. You know, the facilities are very, very large, have thousands of people, and we probably should have reconsidered whether we wanted to put that many essential workers in one location, you know, before we consider the fact that none of those plants have any social distancing measures whatsoever. You know, some of the most egregious problems occurred where a couple of the big multinational corporations had attendance policies that basically required people that were sick to still come to work. You know, that's unacceptable. I don't care what anyone says. And the other thing we have to remember is that IBP started this whole mess, which is now Tyson. But, you know, the meat packing industry used to be significantly smaller, not the scale of us, but significantly smaller. And it used to be good union jobs. You know, people would pass those jobs down through their family because they were good. I mean, it was always hard work, don't get me wrong, but it was a good, honest job, and it was a good paying job. IBP started in Iowa ruining that, broke the unions, turned it into minimum wage jobs. And we pay processing plant workers in this country way, way too little. We make them work in way, way too dangerous of conditions. And a lot of it is just a plain lack of respect for our food supply. all the way from the environment, the farmers, the animals, the workers, and even the consumer. I mean, our diet that we're feeding people is horrendous, and it's all about this wonderful theory of cheap food. And cheap food has not been good for the farmers, and it's not been good for the consumers. It's only good for the packers and the retailers, and we really ought to reconsider that whole notion.
Thank you. Lily?
Yeah, I think that Maria and Greg really kind of laid out the issues really well. So I'll talk a little bit about some work that's been going on here in Maryland to try to address particularly what's going on with COVID. Food and Water Action has been working with a new coalition, Marylanders for Food and Farm Worker Protection, that formed from, it's some environmental groups like us, public health folks, immigrant and migrant worker rights groups have been working together to pressure Governor Hogan to enact an emergency order. We've seen it like 14 states, I think, now have some sort of emergency protective measures for essential workers, including our neighbors in Virginia. And I think a lot of those don't go far enough, but it's certainly like something we need to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to protect people who, like Maria said, they've been deemed essential, but being treated as though they're disposable. And, we're hearing from some of the poultry companies that they've done all this work to make it safer. And, I've seen a picture with workers who are still like shoulder to shoulder, but now there's like a little dangling piece of plexiglass between them. And I don't think that addresses the risk. I mean, the more we learn about COVID, the more we realize it's airborne. It's not, this little thing's not going to do any good. We've just been hearing the same stories as Maria of people, not having personal protective equipment and being encouraged to work sick. So we're really working hard to pressure the governor, and if he doesn't take action, we're hoping that it'll come before the legislature in January. And I think this is also, public awareness is higher of the issue of the dangers and health risks that these workers face now because of COVID. So we're pushing to, at a minimum in Maryland, there's an exemption for agricultural workers from paid sick leave, and we're hoping that due to the increased awareness from COVID, we might have an opportunity to repeal that exemption. So that's something that we're going to be working on during the legislative session. I think that's all I've got. The other two summed everything up really well.
Great, thank you. So in Maryland, activists, scientists, and policymakers have pushed to pass the Community Health Air Act, which will require the Maryland Department of the Environment to study the impacts of air emissions from industrial chicken houses and assess any public health impacts. Why hasn't this bill passed? What barriers do you see to this sort of legislation in Maryland or elsewhere? And Lily, since you kind of touched upon this in your last answer, I figure you should go first on this one.
Sure, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Maria on this as well, because she was super involved with the work we did on it. Basically, I think it comes down to too much corporate power and too little political will. The bill was introduced, and this was before my time at Food and Water Action, so Maria can fill in some details, but introduced 3 years in a row. Is that correct, Maria?
It was actually introduced 2 years.
It was 2, and then so the second year, it was introduced. It ended with this sort of like compromise between industry and government, where the Delmarva poultry industry was supposed to set up a number of air monitoring stations around the Eastern Shore, but so essentially the industry is now supposed to be monitoring itself, which is, it's nowhere near the actual quality of the science that we wanted to see, and it doesn't include the study that we wanted to see. I think this is a common with environmental justice issues, where the folks who are most directly affected don't have the political power. There's a real kind of culture of harassment that we've seen from the industry, where people are afraid to speak out because they may be getting threatening phone calls, or you know, their kids getting bullied at school if their parents speak out against it. And the legislators in the areas where this is taking place are in, you know, they're linked, they have a lot of ties to the industry, whether it be campaign contributions or family connections or what have you. And then trying to organize outside the Eastern Shore, you know, people just see it as a problem that it's not their problem. And so it's hard to get legislators who are really willing to champion this issue because they don't see it as something that affects their constituents. And this is kind of more broadly than just the Community Healthy Air Act, obviously.
Thank you. Maria, can you answer?
Yes. So I'm going to tell you right now why we don't have this bill passed. And why we don't have this bill passed is because we have a lobby system where transparency is not going to help the industry. That's exactly why we don't have it. This is a thorn in my side because we talk about environmental injustice. This issue came out of local citizens that were dealing with an influx of what they call these no land CAFOs, meaning that there are no fields surrounding them, just chicken houses, you know, CAFOs edge to edge on a parcel. And the community had a lot of concerns. We live in a representative democracy, or we are supposed to, and they did everything right. They went to their local officials and they had all kinds of research and documentation about, you know, the emissions and what comes out of the fans and ammonia and the health impacts from that particulate matter. And at the county level of government, the trade industry was coming in, DPI, which is Delmarva Poultry Industry. It had the former executive director then, Bill Satterfield, had stated that, well, you have data, but none of this is Maryland data. We need Maryland data. So the community said, okay, let's get Maryland data if this is what we need. But underlying it, and Dr. Wilson was part of this as well as Center for a Livable Future, ammonia is ammonia is ammonia. It doesn't matter what state or what animal species it's coming from. It has the same health impacts. So with the help of Food and Water Watch, this legislation was brought up and it required just to get data. It was as simple as that. And if industry, you know, always says this is not impacting public health, they don't believe, then why would not they let this bill go through and put this issue to rest, right? Let's put it to bed one way or the other. That's not what happened. They went around the back door, and we found this out through PIA requests, which are kind of like Freedom of Information Act, but in Maryland they call them PIA, that while this legislation was gaining traction, because it wasn't requiring anyone to do anything, just get data, which seems, who would lobby against that, right? But while this was happening, the Maryland Department of Environment with the Keith Campbell Foundation and part of the industry were having common discussions about doing their own study, which will not bring about the kind of rigorous data and testing that we need. It has only 2 data points, two stations, and it's not gathering what would actually be needed to protect communities, let's put it that way. So again, one of the things we talk about environmental injustice, one of the principles is the community speaks for themselves and they have a seat at the table. Well, all these discussions and negotiations were going on about their community where they live, work, pray, and play, but guess who didn't have a seat at the table?
So I know that the political environment in Indiana is probably a little different than that in Maryland, but Greg, if you could speak on some of the barriers you perceive blocking a bill like this from passing in your state or just in general.
I think one of the biggest barriers in regulating agriculture is that there's still this perception, and it's a false perception, but there's still this perception among the American people that U.S. agriculture and U.S. meat and poultry, milk and eggs is still largely a family farm operation. And the American people, you know, have a high regard for family farms. But I think what the American people don't realize is that agriculture is concentrated and consolidated. And while they may be owned by family, I mean, Walmart is a family-owned retailer. Cargill is a family-owned agribusiness corporation. So, I mean, we have troubles coming up with the definition of what a family farm is. Yet, I think most of us have a perception in our head, and you know, don't think that 4, 6, 8, 12 million hens on one farm is a family farm. Don't think that 20,000 to 70,000 milk cows on one farm is a family dairy operation. That 6,000 to 10,000 sows on one farrowing site is a family farm. Yet that's the current scale that agriculture, you know, 150, 180,000 beef cattle in one feedlot. And those are the kind of operations that, because of that perception that those are family farms, we're saying that they need an exemption from the Clean Air Act. And, you know, at some point when you're an industrial operation, and, you know, we could argue all day where that point is, but at some point when you're an industrial operation, you probably should be regulated as you're in industry, not as exempt because you're the small mom and pop family farm. And I think that we struggle both on the consumer side and on the farm side for the, you know, the actual true family farms won't stand up against it either. So it's a huge, huge challenge. And yes, they have all kinds of lobbyists and corporate power, and they have all kinds of farm and trade associations, some of them which we have to pay for with our own checkoff dollars. So I even helped to fund to pay this message. You know, the Farm Bureau is very powerful. You know, and they actually sometimes do represent all farmers, but they for sure represent the largest of farms. Our own USDA represents the largest of farms better. So, I mean, we're fighting huge, huge money, huge, huge corporate power, and huge misinformation.
Right. Thank you. So the SHE's lab, which Dr. Shakobi Wilson runs, focuses on using community science as a tool to combat environmental injustice. What role do you see for community members in community science in mitigating environmental health problems related to CAFOs? What are some emerging or innovative areas of research for communities to be more engaged in? Maria, can you answer this question first, please?
Sure. So I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Greg was just saying, because he said it so well. You know, we talk about the power of these political lobbies, and, you know, the power and the investment from the industry runs deep. Land grant universities have been a big problem. We need independent science. We need science that is actually going to produce rigorous testing results that will improve upon people's lives with policy. And here is where we seem to always hit that brick wall. So, you know, there is, like Greg was saying, checkoff, right? He's paying into it. There's all of this money that is being put into their side of the system. You come into a community, and we're talking about, again, think about the communities we're talking where this happens. They are communities with little money and little power. So here we are now as a community. Guess what? We have to do our own research, right? Because no one is going to help from government, their influence. We need real research. So, and Dr. Wilson is so good at this, because I think the best democracy we can have is where people are engaged. So you take academia, you take researchers, you take communities where they know, you know, where things are happening and where things are going wrong and where there's enforcement need. They know this. So to participate in research that is actually going to produce results that will be transparent, because transparency is a big problem. We just did an overlay down here. Dr. Wilson was actually involved in it because we found that where there was a lot of nitrate contamination, the special education rates in the school district was very elevated. But when we tried to get overlay and data, it was not classified or in a transparent way that we could. So we're excited because currently we have a project going on, which is actually starting. Let's say that we're the beginning steps of it. But it is going to be real science and real research that will translate, hopefully, to better policy in the end. And I think that's the best democracy we can have, is to have folks that know how to do this research and are experts in public health and research to empower communities by a white paper is great, but unless we use that white paper to accomplish something, and this connects everyone together and with the voice of the community, because that's what's needed.
Great, thank you. So Devon Hall just joined us, and Devon, did you hear the question I asked, or should I repeat it?
Okay, no, I didn't hear the question. Please repeat.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question was, what role do you see for community members and community science in mitigating environmental health problems related to CAFOs? And what are some emerging or innovative areas of research for communities to be more engaged in?
Let me say it this way, based on my experience here in Duplin County, North Carolina. And REACH has been involved in research for, since 2004. And what we're seeing now, we continue to use the term community-driven or community-owned research. Based on our focus for the next 3 to 3 years, that's a lot of our work, what we're focusing on. We use research as tools to educate and empower communities. But at the same time, here in Duplin County, where we're so heavily impacted by swine CAFOs and a growing population of poultry, we're trying to use research now to more or less get more people engaged, in policy making, because having the data or be a part of creating the data is not enough if you can't get that data in the hands of policymakers or into the hands of people that's going to really listen and want to initiate some changes. So that's one of the things we're struggling with now, is at the same time, myself at my age too, the data alone is won't solve the problem here, because we're looking at systemic issues, systemic problems that need to be changed. And the one thing that I feel that's going to help us now is what we're facing right now, getting to the polls in a big way, because we start using the term grow your own. So if your policymakers is not, drafting bills or laws to help you, the impacted community, then we had to change the way our policymakers, think. And again, in doing so, we have to grow our own elected officials. It's a challenge in small rural communities. And in many cases, you know, we'll have people that are parachuting and support us and work with us in research, but at the same time, don't understand the problem that the community faces. And with anything that we have to do here, we have to approach, how to use a holistic approach.
Absolutely. Thank you. Greg, could you answer the question, please?
Sure. I don't really know that I have a lot to add to the whole research component. I think personally, I think the research is very clear that there's some challenges, especially, like I said, for those that live really close to these, and then for as a society at large. And I think that, you know, as people that advocate for a better rural America and a more sane and reasonable food supply, I think that we have to concentrate on some efforts that actually connect to more people and get people, consumers especially, you know, because we all consume food, to be engaged in these activities because, you know, we have lots more people on our side. They have lots more money on their side. And our system really should represent people, not money. But the people have to show up.
Thank you. Lily?
Yeah, I also don't feel like I have a lot to add. At Food and Water Watch, we don't do a ton of on the ground research like that, but I think it's extremely valuable given that we see our government's not doing the science that needs to be done, and the corporations that produce that are causing the problem certainly aren't tracking their own pollution. So citizens are essentially left to be like the whistleblowers for when a problem's going on. And I also think it's as Maria was saying, a really good way to involve the community and raise awareness of exactly what the harms of these factory farms are on their water or air or whatever you may have.
Absolutely. Thank you. So what challenges have you personally faced with regards to the work that you do? What lessons or takeaways do you have for other people dealing with environmental injustice and the animal agriculture industry? Devon, can we start with you, please?
First, you know, I just start off by saying you can't quit. You know, in communities like where I live, they use all types of intimidation tactics. You know, and trust me, you know, Reach has been involved in research for, like I stated earlier, since 2004. And I'm trying to remember the number of, oh gosh, whether it's water, health, air quality, the different projects we worked on. And again, I just had to go kind of lean back to what I was saying earlier. You know, collecting the data is one thing, and you know, being a part of the you know, developing the project plan. But again, if the powers that be, if they want to accept your data, and you know, one thing I will say about the polluters, they know about the damage that they're doing. And whenever they see the reports or read about the research we've done, they know that we're right about it. But at the same time, when you're fighting powers like that has those type dollars, you know, then again, you know, you just have to start looking at your policymakers, because if you can change your local leaders, if you can change their minds, you know, and that's what I believe that we have to start change the system from the ground up.
Thank you. Lily?
So I don't know if this counts as a personal challenge, but something I've noticed in talking about this issue with, even if I just tell someone I know in my life, you know, what I'm working on. And what I hear a lot is people say, well, I don't eat meat. And, oh, if people should just stop eating meat, or you know, and where people really bring it to as though they made a personal choice, and so then it's not their issue anymore. And I think that ties in with what we see also with fossil fuel companies, or, you know, the plastic straw ban, or something where people see it as this is a problem that consumers have, where I think, you know, we could work for hundreds of years and not solve it by trying to get people to change their individual habits. What we really need is to see policy change, and you know, corporations held accountable for what they're doing. So I think that, you know, that makes some of these issues kind of an uphill battle, because people see it as something they've solved at the personal level, and then they're disincentivized to take action at the higher level.
Thank you. Maria?
So I have kind of a lot to say on this. So personally, I will say that I was devastated. I was not someone who wanted to be an activist, and this was never on my purview. We were a business owner. We had a family business. We were happy. I was raising my child. You know, this is not something that was in any realm in my world. When it did come into my world, I like to say that activists are created. The government creates our activists, okay? Nobody wakes up and says, yeah, I want to fight big money and big power. That's what I wanted to spend my time doing, because it's extremely hard. When our family faced this issue, I, like most people do, reached out to try to get help. And what I saw was these ideals that were raised to believe, right, that if you work hard, you do the right thing, that you will, you know, be able to raise a healthy family, you know, level of success in life. And what I quickly found out was that all these thoughts that we had about, we have these agencies that are there to protect us, and this could never happen. We have an EPA, we have, all of a sudden I saw, oh no, we have problems, because the folks that are supposed to be on the front lines doing various jobs to protect, or what we think, are holding hands with the polluters oftentimes. And there's so much money in the system. I will tell you some of the personal things that I've experienced. Multiple occasions, someone tried to run me off the road. We had a stone thrown through our store front window. We sold antique Oriental rugs. So if you can imagine rolls of rugs, it was like a glass bomb that went off. Every single rug had to be brought out, unrolled, vacuumed. I mean, it was a mess. Somebody put a bullet through one of our doors upstairs. I can remember the way that the house and business was set up was kind of like on a split level, and the house was street level in the back. The shop was street level in the front. And the business checks were upstairs. And I said to Michael as a child, do me a favor, run upstairs and grab mommy a business check. He wouldn't go. He was terrified because someone had just put the windows out with, you know, and I'm thinking, now I'm getting mad, right? Because I'm a mother. And anybody that, you know, has a child understands this is my child's security, their house. When they are scared to go upstairs because somebody is, you know, violently assaulting our property, or, you know, that's beyond the pale. So personal things, there have been a lot, and that didn't scare me. That just drove me more, because I thought this has got to be changed in society. And this is nothing that any other community doesn't go through. I'll tell you, the first question always that a community asks when they call us is, what is our chance of beating this? And my answer is always the same. If we relied on science, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So you need to pace yourself, understand that this is going to be an unfair fight where the scales are tilted. And I think at some point people feel like the issue involves our democracy. Look at Greg. I mean, he's absolutely right. We are losing our family farms. Do we really want to turn the production of our food over to, you know, industry and integrators that really, what interest do they have in our personal communities and our families? You know, this is, it's not a good situation. It really isn't. And people need to understand when Greg talks about this, I know farmers that literally have to drive 2 states to process their animals. This is beyond a dangerous level. And you know, people, they need to come together and really look out that this is not just for, like Lily said, people, you know, that are not involved in the issue. This affects all of us.
Great, thank you. Greg?
Well, I'll add that, you know, I've been an advocate for local food and rebuilding local and regional food systems for 20 some years now. Stepped away from the commodity hog business in 1998 when my wife and I got less for live pigs than what my grandpa got for them during the Depression. And I would say how it's personally impacted me is that, you know, to be flat out honest and pardon my words, we've pissed off a lot of government, trade association, and farmer people, some of them completely unjustified for them being mad just for the fact that we exist. You know, they have this wonderful story that we would not feed the world without industrial agriculture and without concentration and consolidation. They get really upset when I point out we have the same number of sows in the United States in 1979 as what we had in 2012. The only difference is we had 90% less hog farmers in 2012 than 1979. We fed the world just fine with family farms, and we fed the, in fact, we overproduced just as well back then as we overproduce now. And we should have discussions about that because it's a huge, huge waste of resources. We don't need all this food. And people look at me really, really strange, but I'm a you know, processing plant owner and harvest pigs and poultry. We eat too much meat, every single American, 200 pounds about every year for every man, woman, and child. That's too much. We should consume less. But, you know, I've been viewed in my community for a long time as that granola crunching hippie farmer that probably ought to just put up some buildings to put their to put his pigs and chickens in. But, you know, over the years, you do something long enough, and I think that even some of those people that thought you were crazy start to eventually have some respect for the fact that, you know, maybe he's not completely crazy, you know, and our society did come around a little bit, and you know, the whole farm to fork movement, it's kind of trendy what we do now. But, you know, I'm not going to stand here and say that we really gained a lot by that, because my impression is that we've won some battles over the years, but we're still losing the war. We're getting our asses kicked out here in rural America. It's not just industrial agriculture, it's multinational corporations. The largest owner of pigs in the United States is a Chinese company, Smithfield. The largest owner of beef in the United States and largest processor is JBS. We're losing our ability and our resilience to be able to produce food, and it's becoming dire, and we really need to do something about that.
Thank you. So we're starting to run a little short on time. So final question before we open up to Q&A. What successes and solutions do you see that show promise for the environmental justice issues associated with CAFOs? What inspires you to continue working towards a just agricultural system? So, Greg, I want to let you start with this one.
Okay, I'll be really short. I'd suggest people watch 2 documentaries. I'd suggest that you watch Right to Harm, and then I'd suggest that you follow it with Kiss the Ground. I think that we need not only people acting individually, consumers making the correct choices, but I also think that we need policy at the local, state, and the federal level that not only discourages industrial agriculture, but that it also has to encourage a positive, sane, and a responsible alternative to what we have now.
Thank you. Lily?
Sure. I think, you know, for me, the solution is we have to keep organizing at the local level, statewide level. I mean, it's just the power we have to fight back against these corporations is just our votes and our numbers and to keep on speaking up. Amidst all the tragedy of COVID-19 and the coronavirus epidemic, I do think it's made people a lot more conscious of how unresilient our current food system is. And, you know, I can only hope that that's an opportunity for people to get educated and then therefore get more involved.
Great, thank you. Maria?
So I would like to say there is, COVID has really exposed, I think, a lot of the problems that we've had throughout the board. Social justice issues, environmental injustice, family farms and their ability to have a viable income, the bottleneck in the supply. So much is being looked at right now. And we're seeing some policy and legislation to address some of these things that I hope we can get pushed through, because like I said, if we do not learn from this, it's not good. We've known there's been environmental racism for years, environmental injustice. Knowing is not enough. Now we need to act on that. So 2 things. We have the Farm Systems Reform Act, Lily. That is legislation. There are 300, I believe, groups, I think at the last count, right, Lily, signed on to it. This addresses a lot of the problems and a just transition through even trying to, a lot of the things that impact this system, and especially contract farmers that are tied up in this, is debt, because there is no way to get out. So there's a lot of legislation being brought up, a lot of legislation on environmental injustice with some of the workers' issues. Something was just brought to my attention, a bill called Thrive. And that is actually, I had just a brief chance to look at it, but I think that's something that we want to keep an eye on. So it's something called Transform, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy Act. And that addresses climate change, some economic issues, but it also involves the food system. And here's the whole deal. The food system has so many different components that it needs a whole revamp throughout. So I don't think we can take baby steps. I think it involves all of us and so many different sectors. So I think that's something needed. One more thing I want to throw in here, because I know this is really valuable to me. Greg has a Facebook page, Politics from the Pasture. For those who want to really learn about these issues, Greg is the man, because he tracks and watches and discusses this. It's a lot of discussion on the page, and it's really important. So it's a good view into why we have some of these problems for the general public that's just trying to learn.
Great, thank you. And Greg, if you'd like to plug your Facebook page into the chat, that'd be great as well. Devon?
Well, one thing, we have to continue our fight, you know, just looking to be here and support the next generation. And realize that, you know, a positive change will come if we persevere. You know, I look back at the racial justice movement, you know, with Black Lives Matter, and of course, you know, all lives matter. But, you know, but I look at how that this younger generation is capturing the world stage and is really, really making a difference. And so that tells me that even what we're doing with this, you know, facing environmental justice, addressing CAFO issues, if we, you know, just hang in there, change will come. Change is slow, you know, and that's one thing that I've said for many years. If you want change and if you expect it to happen overnight, it don't work like that. If you're looking for microwave, you know, type style changes, then it won't last. It's not good for you. Again, once you put your hand to this plow, or really, you know, and get out there and begin to do social justice, environmental justice, racial justice movement, because it's all, you know, entwined. Then once you commit yourself to it and stick with it, eventually, you know, you'll get some help. And I'm beginning to see that now, you know, when I look around and see how the younger generation is stepping up to the plate. I'm 65 years old. And I have a son that was a truck driver, you know, early 40s. And I remember the day when I got a call from him whenever he said, "Pop, I'm coming off the road. And I'm coming there to help you work, help you run the organization." That began, you know, that spoke to me and said, "Hey, look, change will come. We can't quit." And again, the reason why I do what I do is because I have children and grandchildren. I love Dupton County where I was raised, where I was born and raised. And if I don't fight for this this community, then who will?
Thank you. So we're running a little short on time, and we should be wrapping up at about 4 at the latest, so that everybody has time to have a little break before the next session. So I got a single track question, and anybody who feels like they could answer it, please do. So Cindy asks, what does the ideal science-based policy and program framework look like? Whoever feels best to answer this question, please do.
So I can jump in just a little bit and folks can add. I think what we were talking about before about the partnership between academia, researchers, community to actually produce science that then can be translated into policy.
Great. So I think this should probably wrap up this panel. Thank you all so much for participating. It was very enjoyable to hear all your perspectives on CAFOs. And I believe at 4:05, we have a discussion on diversity and inclusion in the EJ Symposium. And then I believe that Dr. Wilson will be giving a closing speech. So I'm going to put the link in the chat for easy access.